Hey guys, it's Edison Giles here. Earlier this week, I wrote a little article for Premier Christianity about the controversy surrounding the Olympic opening ceremony, and they liked it so much that they asked me to come onto their radio show and talk about it further. So I just recorded that this morning. It just went out, and some of you might have missed it, and I thought if I put it in my feed, it might be easier for you to have a listen. I hope you enjoy it.
Inspirational Breakfast with Esther Higham.
Good morning, it's 7:33 on Thursday the 1st of August. It's great to have your company on the programme today. Coming up over the next a little wee while here on the show, I'm wondering, do we take offence too easily as Christians? Following the global outrage at the Olympics opening ceremony tableau, which seemed to mock the Last Supper, we're going to dig deeper into whether we should simply turn the other cheek when others sneer at our faith. That's what Jesus says after all. And a little bit later on, we're going to be catching up with an international prayer walk. Where will we find the man who is praying in all 51 European capitals? And do let me know if you watched that opening ceremony of the Olympics. What did you make of it? Is it all a bit of big fuss about nothing offensive, nothing to see here? Or do you think it was a deliberate sneer at Christianity? Do let me know, studio@premier.org.uk, or text me 66777, starting your message with the word Premier. You can always drop me a voice note on WhatsApp as well, 0303 040 1000, 0303 040 1000.
Premier Christian Radio, your voice of hope.
Now, it has been the talk of the town this week in Christian circles, but I wonder what you made of it. Were you upset, offended, or did you think the whole thing was a fuss about nothing? I'm, of course, referring to the Olympics opening ceremony and the controversial scene evoking Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper painting with drag queens and a transgender model. The moment caused outrage among Catholics and Christian groups around the world, with the Catholic Church in France issuing a statement saying it deplored a ceremony that included scenes of derision and mockery of Christianity. Here's what Premier Christianity editor Sam Hales had to say on the moment when he joined us earlier in the week.
I think what most Christians were saying, though, was, isn't the Olympics about coming together, celebrating diversity, tolerance, people of different backgrounds, us all coming? And it just felt a bit like, why would you then single out Christians for some mocking during your opening ceremony? And I think what I found most interesting, Esther, was, there are two types of Christians, aren't there? There are those who are quite offended a lot of the time, let's be honest. There are people who really, they like to be a bit outraged and to really, it gets them going, and let's send some angry tweets in capital letters. What I found interesting was it wasn't just those kinds of Christians who objected to this. This was people like Archbishop Angelos of the Coptic Orthodox Church is not one for normally tweeting about every tricky cultural issue. People who are very intelligent, very rational, people like Gavin Calvert from the head of Evangelical Alliance, really wherever you looked, people said, look, it's just not on. And so I think it's fascinating, actually, to see the different reactions.
Sam Hales, the editor of Premier Christianity, giving his take on that moment in the Olympics opening ceremony and making a point there that actually this is pretty much across the board in terms of Christian denominations and persuasions. But is he right? Is this the sort of thing that we should get upset about, or are we too quick to take offence? Jesus does tell us to turn the other cheek, and he himself was mocked and scorned. So as his followers, should we expect anything less? Joining me now to share their views is Graham Nicholls, who's the director of the Affinity Network of Churches, and writer Giles Goff. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
So let's all nail our colours to the mast as we start. Graham, did you watch this happening live, or did you watch it back on social media? And what did you make of it? Were you outraged?
I didn't watch it live. I think it's not a binary answer. That's the problem. I think it's quite a nuanced answer to say it's good, I think, to be sensitive and to have some degree of offence and upset and distress. I think the question is what you do with that, whether you you become outraged and complain and demand rights, or whether you at least express this is offensive to me and this is why, and then hopefully try and use it for good. So I do think at root there was some degree of mockery in the whole ceremony, actually, but particularly in that particular scene. But I think in the whole sexualization of that whole kind of segment and some other bits, there is a kind of another offence to Christians and indeed something that's not really very nice for children. So there were whole kinds of things that it was all right to be distressed about. I think it's just what you do with it, which is the key thing.
Well, let's come to that in a minute. Do you think then, Graham, that it was deliberately mocking of Christianity by taking the famous sort of trope, if you like, of the Last Supper and populating it with drag queens and what have you? Do you think it was deliberate, or do you think it was like a bit of a nod to it? Because the main scene itself did feature this blue Smurf-like character who was supposed to be Dionysus, the Greek god.
I think they, yeah, I mean it's really difficult because I'm not an art historian and I'm not sort of totally immersed in the whole organisation. I understand it did have a Last Supper title. The Last Supper on the Seine was the title in French of that particular segment. But you never know intent, do you? You don't know what people really intended, whether they were completely ignorant. But that whole scene, I think was offensive enough. And of course, when the organisers apologised, they didn't really actually say, well, it wasn't anything to do with the Last Supper. They just said, I'm sorry if you were offended, which is quite different to saying, well, we might have made a mistake. So I think it's reasonable to assume there was a degree of intent there. But also the juxtaposition of I suppose, moral behaviour, a particular kind of moral behaviour being encouraged alongside some kind of religious symbolism. That was intentional, wasn't it?
Giles, let me bring you in here. Did you feel it was deliberately offensive? Did you take offence?
Well, actually, I heard about it because everybody else was taking offense. So I'm like, okay, well, I need to go and check this out for myself, because whenever you hear something like this, it's really important to go and see it for yourself, I think, so let's think about for a moment, like what we actually saw. So like approximately like halfway through the opening ceremony on the Dabib footbridge, it gets transformed into this fantastic catwalk where models are striking their stuff in stilettos in the rain. I don't know about you, I was worried for them for large sections of the time, and they are doing all these amazing high fashion outfits. Did you see there was one, she had like prosthetic hands and prosthetic legs? I was just phenomenally blown away by the amount of skill involved with some of this stuff. But right at the start, right at the beginning, on the opposite side of the table from the camera, we get like this group of performers. Some are drag artists, some are trans, and they're all kind of frozen in this tableau. And the image seen is like a recreation, or at least for 40 seconds, some people have said that it's a recreation of Da Vinci's Last Supper, which is sort of like painted towards, I want to say, the end of the 15th century. Now, I just want to pick up on one point you said, Graham, about like, do you think it was intentional or not? And I think, let's be honest, if something bad happens, more often than not, if it's a choice between conspiracy or screw up, it's probably the screw up. I don't believe the Olympics committee were like twirling their mustaches thinking, I know how we're going to get the Christians this time, I'm going to push back on just one thing you said about that it was titled Last Supper on the Seine. So I did a bit of looking into that. The Olympics organisers never actually called it that. Newspapers in France called it that after hearing what Christian commentators were saying. So to call it that, it's a bit of a sort of cyclical argument. It's actually called festivité. And the reason I know that is there's a screenshot from your article, which was awesome, by the way, where it has festivité written on in big letters. And obviously festivité, I'm guessing, translates as festivities, party, having fun. And obviously that's what they were doing on the bridge.
So that's interesting. And I must say, I like you, both of you, in fact, when I saw there was a bit of a hoo-ha, I thought, right, I better watch this for myself. And I've got to say to me, that definitely artistically a nod. There is a nod to the Last Supper. I think anyone at the table, somebody with a halo, although actually perhaps, for Catholics in particular, the blue lady dressed with the halo, maybe seemed to be referencing more pictures of Mary rather than Jesus. But it felt to me that the Dionysus thing, and I had a little look. So this blue guy, who is apparently a very popular comedian in France, a little bit like, I don't know, Harry Hill or Robin Williams or something like that. I wondered what his song was about. I do speak a bit of French, but not enough to translate in real time. And his whole little song was basically a kind of a thing saying, if we were all naked, we'd all be the same. It'd be a level playing field, and you'd have nowhere to hide a gun, so violence would go. So actually, it was a kind of quirky, song about peace. And I think we slightly overlooked that as well, that actually it was clearly, to me anyway, more referencing this sort of Greek god and a bit of a humorous thing. But that's my own personal view, and I'm keen to hear from yours. If you've just joined us, we are continuing to do a deep dive into that controversial scene at the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Do you think it was mocking faith? Do you think, as Giles said, it was a kind of, a bleak reference, but not intentionally mocking? Or like Graham, do you feel actually that there is something here? Because nothing goes out on live global TV without someone thinking about it. Actually, was there a sense of mocking the Christian faith? And if so, what do you make of it? Some of your comments are coming in here. Let's look at some of those already. Jeffrey tells us on our Facebook pages, last time I checked, the Last Supper didn't contain a blue smurf. It was about we like that, don't we? The Greek god Dionysus.
Stealing my lines.
Yeah. Steph says, I made nothing of it. There are more important things to be offended by. In fact, we should be glad if Christianity is worth mocking. It means we have something they don't have. Rick says, I found the Olympic ceremony very flat and boring. There we go. But Jane says this, it's what happens when there's a turn away from God. The devil has a field day. I'm 64, and for as long as I can remember, I've watched the Olympics. This year, I feel so sad about the opening ceremony. Haven't watched any of it. And Samantha says, I was shocked by this display. Even though organisers say it was supposed to be portraying the feast of Dionysius, I don't believe that because the parody resembled the Da Vinci painting much more than a picture of the feast of Dionysus. So there we go. Lots of different views there, and we're going to delve into all of those this morning together. But what I want to ask this morning as well, Graham, is it right that we get offended? The Bible warns us quite clearly that as Christians we're going to be mocked at best and persecuted at worst. So is it worth getting hot onto the collar about something like this?
It depends. Yeah, it depends what you mean by getting hot on the collar. I do agree, by the way, that intention is really hard to find. I do find it curious that so many people would have seen it in practice and everything else, and no one made that connection. So I do find that curious, but there's no sort of clear evidence, and I accept it. It may be a misunderstanding, but I think it's okay, and not even okay. I think it's right to feel some degree of offence and upset, to think of the kind of the whole scene, and if nothing else, the disdain there is for Christianity, that no one would even worry that it might cause offence. It was only a little bit of kind of rearguard action after it had happened. So I think it's all right to feel a sadness of the potential blasphemy, but I don't think it's right to feel like our main priority is to have equal rights with everybody else, or to make a great fuss about it. I think it having happened, I think it's okay to express on behalf of the Christian community, this is potentially offensive and this is why. But I think go somewhere good with it after that and say, well, how can we use this to talk about the Last Supper, or talk about why this is important, or even dare to talk about why we love people and we love to include people, and we love diversity, but we don't think every lifestyle is actually equally valid or right or good. So we can have conversations about that, which say, well, we love in a sense, the Olympic ideal, but the Olympic ideal is actually met in the church. It's not met in people trying to kind of impose a particular form of unity on people, or trying to just make it happen by effort. So I think there's loads of good conversation starters we can use, rather than kind of walking around being outraged. And I think it is important how we present ourselves as not being grumpy and easy to take offence. And our main priority is not about our rights. Very occasionally, Paul the Apostle calls on his rights when he's in Philippi, for example, but most of the time he kind of lets himself be beaten up, taken to prison, various things, and just gets on with gospel work, really, and dusts himself off and goes to the next town.
Giles, has the Christian community scored a bit of an own goal here? Because actually we've reinforced the idea that Christians are against stuff rather than for stuff. Actually, did we let this get out of hand? Did we not have the grace that Graham's talking about there in the way we responded?
Do you know, it's fascinating, because I think we're getting a bit of like the Streisand effect. People didn't like it, and because they made such a fuss about not liking it, it actually drew more attention to it. I'm not hugely into spectator sports, and yet I ended up watching just this section of the Olympics opening ceremony. I wouldn't watch it otherwise, because you said there was sexualization of children in there, and I had to oh, good Lord, that's terrifying. I need to check that is or isn't the case. So I feel like we've drawn a lot of attention to it by being offended by it. I loved what you said about like we don't have to approve every lifestyle, and I completely agree with that. But what I can't figure out is what specifically, what exactly is it that's offensive about 40 seconds of one shot? Like let's ignore the Dionysus bit, because clearly when the blue Smurf turns up and the BBC commentator identifies him as Dionysus, we know, okay, this is clearly not the Last Supper anymore. We've moved on. So let's look at those 40 seconds, that opening shot. Now, if we think about what it's actually got in common with the Last Supper painting, there's a table and there's people in a line. And then we find out that actually it's not really a table, it's actually a catwalk. So the similarity it has is that there are people in a line. They're standing, they're not sitting like they are in the Last Supper. The blocking is completely different. They're also, there's no, like the performer on the Dubee Bridge has a big kind of halo. Jesus doesn't have a halo in the shot. And also, crucially, Jesus wasn't making a little heart sign, and Jesus didn't have any turntables in the original shot. I mean, I think that'd be a fascinating conversation about what kind of turntables Jesus would have had. But I guess what I can't work out is what exactly it was about it that was offensive, beyond just the fact that there are some trans people in it. And just are we saying that trans people interacting with Christianity in any way, shape, or form is wildly offensive? Because I can't help but think we've got an amazing, fantastic opportunity here to show like our LGBTQ friends, whether they're in the closet or not, whether we know they are or not, that we're not offended by them interacting with Christianity. We want them to do that, and that we love them, and that we're safe to be around. Surely that should be our priority, right?
Well, that's controversial as well, of course, depending on people's theology. But I suppose what I really want to know is, do we get it wrong when we get offended? Does it put more people off than it does go, actually, yes, you're right to defend your right for your faith to be expressed? Graham, do we get it wrong if we show that we're easily offended? Does it make Christians look too oversensitive, too defensive?
I think it is, but if we say nothing, and I agree with Giles that we may have got it wrong, and maybe it may be overblown, but to say we don't care about the name of Jesus or the reputation of Jesus, I think is the other extreme. I think it's okay to say we bear with it, we accept that Christians many generations have been oppressed and offended and downtrodden, and it's quite unusual that the era that we're just coming out of, where Christianity was dominant. So I think we can say all those things, but to say I don't really care, I don't even care if it was depicting the Last Supper and kind of sexualized imagery, I think means we're not really sensitive to the glory of Jesus and what was going on at the Last Supper and so on. So to juxtapose a particular lifestyle, because it wasn't just there's a few trans people just being trans people. There was in the whole kind of the dance moves and the imagery, there was kind of moves to suggest it was a short section, but enough that you knew what they were talking about, and you also knew that there was a kind of a sexualization of it. So I think it's all right to be offended. It's as I keep saying, it's what you do with it.
Okay, well, let's move on to that now. Actually, I just want to read an email from Folashade, who's been in touch this morning. She said she watched the ceremony on and off while she was having a nap. It was quite long, wasn't it?
Yes.
But she's sort of agreeing with you in a way, Graham, that actually she felt there was quite a lot of things that made her angry. She's also referencing right at the end there, actually incredibly artistic mechanical horse with a rider riding up the River Seine. Folashade feels that was straight out of the book of Revelations, and she felt there was a lot of stuff that was blasphemous and satanic as well. She mentions this scripture, which quite a few people have used, I think. God will not be mocked in Galatians. What does that scripture actually mean? I'd love both your views on that. Giles, what does that scripture mean?
God will not be mocked. That's I mean,
it's from Galatians, isn't it? Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've seen that one coming up in the comments a few times. And I think, first of all, God is this giant thing. One of a better phrase. God is flipping massive. He was So when we jump to his defense, I feel like it's a flea trying to defend an elephant. It's like he's, you know, if you can mock him and it's not going to make a difference. He's still everything. He's still the king of the universe. And also Jesus died in the most humiliating way possible. Absolutely horrendous. It was a symbol of not just execution, but humiliation, and where I'm not going to go into the level of horrendous things that happened to him. But in terms of like levels of humiliation and mockery, something that you choose to interpret a certain way in a ceremony feels quite low down on the list of mockery. Do you know what I mean? I was an English teacher for 10 years. I taught GCSE English, and one of the key things that we always try to get in students' heads is that there is a plurality of interpretations. If you say just this equals this, I'm going to have to mark you down. But if you say, well, it could be seen this way or it could be seen that way, then you'll get your higher marks, basically. And what I'm seeing throughout all the kind of conservative right-wing Christians is that it is this way, this horse equals the riders of the apocalypse.
A little bit less nuanced. I'm aware we're running short of time. That's a really good point. Graham, for you, God will not be mocked. What does that mean?
I think it has a particular context and doesn't have a lot to do with this situation. I think it's to do with the way the lifestyle works its way out, and God can't be kind of deceived, or you can't mess around with God and get away with it. I think that's more what that text says. So I don't think it directly connects.
Out of context.
Yeah, no, I think so. But I think if someone said God is horrible, I think it's okay for me to defend him. It's not that he needs defending, but I am one of his agents on this earth to do that. I think Christians, by the way, have not been very helpful in this, in the way they've taken positions on this and called each other right wing and left wing and too offended or not offended enough and everything else. So the way we've conducted this debate this morning has been very civilized, but some of the social media debate on this topic has not been, which I think is probably more of a distress to me.
Before we go, you've got 1 minute each to tell me what's a good way to deal with this. Graham, you were saying we've got to use this opportunity as a way of actually sharing our faith. So how do you do that in a minute?
Yeah, I think some people think it was the Last Supper, and the Last Supper was a great lead into what Jesus did at the cross. So although I found it really a weird ceremony, I'd love to talk to you about kind of what that painting was about and what that painting signified, and some kind of way in to do with that. Rather than going on the trans train, I think would not be so helpful.
Change the story. Giles, for you, how can we use this for good, to use this moment to actually help people engage with Jesus?
Fantastic. Well, I think the opportunity there is the chance to talk to our trans friends or our LGBTQ friends about Christ, about the Last Supper, have a look at it as a comparison. I mean, if you think about it, the Last Supper itself is a little bit anachronistic because it portrays Jesus as white. So even that's quite offensive because it gets major things about Jesus' skin color wrong, The Great Commission tells us we've got to go to all the ends of the earth. We've got to talk to everybody, whether we like what they're dressed in or not, whether we like their dance moves or not, or whether they're just flipping weird, which, let's be honest, the Olympic ceremony, it's always a little bit weird. There's always stuff about that particular country you're not going to get. So we've just got to be able to be open and also to assume good faith in other people, I think.
Great to get both of your takes this morning. If you're interested in delving more, do go to premierchristianity.com, where there's articles by both Graham and Giles bringing different perspectives to that opening ceremony. And as both of them say, why not use this moment in our history, in the national debate, to get a chance to share your faith with someone, maybe even someone who you don't agree with. That would be a really great way of using this moment for good. Do let me know what you think as well. As you've been listening to the conversation, do get in touch. studio@premier.org.uk or text me 66777, starting your message with the word Premier. News is next.